I am no longer optimistic anymore. And the reason is very simple. Mm-hmm. The reason is because I'm afraid that these RNA, mod RNA vaccines, whatever you want to call them, have already done their job. And what their job has been, and this is incredible, was not even known to the planners because they didn't realize that what they were doing. But it is what I said years ago, that the vessels throughout the body are going to be attacked from top to toe. This is something that never happens in any disease, okay? Systemic, meaning the brain, the heart, the liver, everything can be attacked, the vessels. And the trouble is that it's turned out to be true. So this systemic vasculitis leads to destruction of brain cells, obviously. And that is what we are now experiencing. We're seeing, I'm afraid to say, billions of people whose brains are not working anymore, not as they should be. Mm-hmm. They are altered, and they do not have, they don't have the willpower anymore. They do not have the intelligence anymore to move things. You are now introducing an agent, so-called, which they are blinding the minds of people, because these are making people stupid. They are making people lose their intelligence. And this is the most dangerous part of all. These are killing people. You have your myocarditis, you've got your strokes, heart attacks. These are all terrible. You've got all these athletes that are dying. You've got all these young people that are dying. Very bad. But the worst thing is that those billions that have been injected are losing their minds. This is something that people don't realize. And they're becoming more and more controllable because they cannot say no. It's fantastic. It's brilliant. And it's nightmarish, horrible, diabolical, satanic. It's got to be stopped.
To add also a comment to what Tina said about the change in personality, depression, and all these things, this is very real. And we have identified the reasons from the theory, and some doctors in Italy have, some pathologists have confirmed that. The spike protein unfortunately attacks and destroys also the endocrine system. So the glands producing hormones, and hormones are what make our emotions and feelings and all those things. And so an Italian pathologist near Venice, he went on a newspaper telling that all the brains he had investigated, he found the pineal gland completely destroyed on all the people who were. Okay, so the spike protein is also very dangerous for the endocrine system. That's why people have these changes in personality, and yeah.
Well, what about the 1p36 gene deletion? So if you look at the post-marketing experience of Pfizer, they listed 1,291 separate maladies that were serious adverse events of special interest. The 1p36 gene deletion is a congenital disease, meaning you're born with it. And yet that was the #1 serious adverse event. And if you look up the symptomology for that, it's the elimination of your frontal cortex. Your thinking part of your brain, your decision-making part of your brain is the #1 serious adverse event listed by Pfizer.
These are very Mengele-type experiments in the Pfizer documents. They are like minutely focused on human reproduction or mammalian reproduction. They're minutely focused on damage to to, high miscarriage rates, high abortion rates. And so then back to the personality changes, looking at how the lipid nanoparticles enter everywhere and thinking about nerves. I asked our researchers to look at the effect of the lipid nanoparticles on neurological responses. And I got a very detailed report from another distinguished professor of pathology, Dr. Chris Flowers. And he said, indeed, these lipid nanoparticles degrade the myelin sheath, as they would, because they go through everything. They basically weaken everything. And the myelin sheath is how neural impulses are transmitted. And when you have a degradation of the myelin sheath, you have the kinds of neurological conditions you see at scale in the Pfizer documents that I was very surprised to see there at first, like MS and Parkinson's and dementia and all the things that happen when human neurological systems are degraded. So now, closing out back to the kind of change in personality, this really made a lot of mysteries make sense. I talked about the missing energy field, which you don't have to believe in. It's not something that Western science has confirmed, though many body workers are talking about how they can't feel their patients anymore. If they're, they can't feel the energy field of their patients. The notion of a human energy field that affects health is absolutely standard, of course, in Ayurvedic medicine and Tibetan medicine and Chinese medicine. But leaving that aside, what these lipid nanoparticles entering the brain and degrading the the nervous system really do go to is something that you can measure, but that I was seeing all around me, which was colleagues of mine, after they got injected, would be much more dualistic in their thinking, much more rigid. And if you know the structure of the brain, that could make sense. It could be that, the prefrontal cortex is affected, or it could be that there's a kind of almost a rigidifying or a slowing. And I'm not a physician, so I'm kind of groping here, but if people's thinking is more rigid and there's damage to the neural structures, that seems like something worth asking more questions about. But I also knew that people were much angrier, and many people online have been confirming this and describing their own experiences of it. Less ability to modulate emotions, kind of more primal reaction to provocation. And people have also been saying, and I've witnessed this, that the changes are affective, that people that have always been affectionate, warm, loving have become cold, distant. Many people talk about adult children or bigger children, cutting things off, like saying things like, well, we're not aligned politically, so I'm not going to visit you anymore, and just what we've seen from the vaccinated to the unvaccinated, the kind of bizarre willingness, which I could only interpret in the light of mass hypnosis, which other people like Dr. Desmet, Matthias Desmet have talked about, or political inflammation, as you see in a kind of group psychosis, as in, forgive me, but Germany in the 30s, but, in other places where there have been kind of in groups and out groups, Jim Crow laws, but this could kind of also help explain the kind of willingness of vaccinated to cut off the unvaccinated, to, deny them groceries, deny them medical care. People are seeing at an atomized level or an individual level, this kind of closing down of compassion. And I don't have the answers. And I thought that Dr. Bhakti's discussion, was very profound and important. And I'm very interested to hear what Dr. Bregan is going to say. And I know there are many, I'm focused on the lipid nanoparticles in the brain and the heart, but, other people are more focused on the spike protein, which they're finding, as you say. But I think these are questions that absolutely have to be asked, because, and this is the last thing I'll say, my argument throughout is that this has been a war on the human and what makes us human. And if an injection can close down people's compassion or their higher powers of nuanced critical thinking, it could close down, close down their connection to a sense of, spirituality. It could close down their sense of responsibility to the next generation. We don't know. Like, this is a massive experiment on the human brain and the human heart. And I guess I'll end with that.
Have you noticed that the people that got are acting a little weird? I'm not talking about weird, like, I'm just talking about, like, motherfuckers are mad all the time, man. No empathy. Like, they got cloudy vision, like, they don't think. Like, you try to come to them with some ideas, they're like, like, really, man, has anybody noticed that shit, man? Has anybody noticed that anybody in their family, any friends or somebody they know that got the... Have you noticed that they're acting a little weird, strange, man? Like, they're all cold, like they don't got a soul and shit, man? I've just been noticing that shit, man.
Tell us your name, please.
My name is Suella Clark.
And this is about your mother-in-law, correct?
Yes, that's
so
right.
Talk us. So she had the Johnson & Johnson. Talk to us about her character before she took the Johnson & Johnson, and then tell us about her character after.
So before she had the Johnson & Johnson, she was always the kindest, sweetest person. She just couldn't do enough for people. She just was an amazing woman. However, and she always had a problem with her other daughter-in-law, but she would not have let her know that she had any issues or anything. She was just always kind. She then went and had a booster, and within 1 week, her whole personality changed. She started being really mean about the daughter-in-law. She had stories that she really believed that had happened to her daughter-in-law's children. She said that she had abandoned the children and that she had stolen all the husband's money. She genuinely believed that these children were in a dire sort of state, somewhere else, not being looked after. She believed that my husband and I were getting divorced, and we weren't. She had everything she thought it wasn't true, but she totally believed it. She thought that her doctor had cancer and that he had died. And then we told her he hadn't died, and then she said, oh, that's very strange. And then she said, okay, he hasn't. A few days later, she said he died again. So everything she was talking about was always dark, almost demonic. And it was all about diseases. Everyone had cancer. She said, friends of ours, that the husband had got cancer and the wife had got some other illness. She thought that there was some plague, cholera coming back that was going around South Africa.
So it's like a form of madness.
Yeah, yes. And it was just 1 week, totally fine. The following week, a different person.
Well, welcome to this talk. Now, we're going to be looking at a case today of damage to the brain and damage to the myocardium after. But the question is this damage to the brain and heart caused by the, or is it caused by the natural infection? Well, we actually found out, or the researchers in this study found out, that the damage in the brain and the heart was caused by the, not the infection, because they only found the spike protein in the brain and in the heart. The spike protein had actually been produced, we believe, by the cells in the brain and the heart. As the RNA circulated around the brain and the heart, these cells produced the spike protein, and that caused the inflammatory reaction that caused the damage. If it had been natural infection, there would have been spike protein and nucleocapsid protein. And actually the nucleocapsid protein is the most abundant protein produced by the virus, so there would have been loads of it. So we can say definitively that this damage was caused by, not by the natural infection. Let's have a look at the proof for that now. So here we see the SARS coronavirus 2 virus that we're familiar with, the spike protein here, of course. Now, the spike protein can occur on the virus itself, or the spike protein is also generated by the vaccine. But the nucleocapsid protein is inside. It's associated with the RNA, the actual ribonucleic acid of the virus. And the nucleocapsid protein is only found in the virus. It's never generated by a vaccine. So if you see spike protein on its own, that means it's vaccine. If you see spike protein and nucleocapsid protein, it means it's natural viral infection. That's the difference between the two. Now, in this first slide, we're looking at the frontal part of the brain, and we can see patches of degeneration and inflammation. On this next picture, we can actually see acute brain damage as well. Whenever there's a 1, that's death of a nerve cell, neuronal death. And 2 is microglial infiltration. These are the defense cells in the brain. And 3 are lymphocytes, which are associated with viral infection. And of course, all of these are pathological findings. None of them should be there. Now, going on to the heart, this is myocarditis that we're seeing here. And we won't look at everything, but the 5s, where there's 5, that's cardiomyocyte. That's the myocardial cells that have degenerated in those areas. And the other numbers represent other pathological findings, things that should simply not be there. Now, this one here is zonal activation of microglial cells. So here we see these microglial defense. These are macrophage type cells in the brain in this affected zone here. And I think we can see the clear border between the two, between the infected zone or the affected zone with the inflammatory response and the clear zone without the inflammatory response. Now, this is in the frontal brain as well. Now, these brown bits here, when you see the brown bits, these brown bits are spike protein. So we see spike protein in the front part of the brain. And we see it there again. This is in a different part of the brain. This is in one of the nuclei of the brain. And the brown is the spike protein, and this is also inflamed. So it's clear that there is spike protein here in the brain. But using exactly the same technique, this is in the frontal lobe of the brain, it's negative for nucleocapsid protein. So there's no brown bits there because there's no nucleocapsid protein present. And it's the same in the heart. The brown bits there, the brown bits there are the spike protein that of course shouldn't be there. Was this caused by natural infection? Well, no, because when we look at the heart under this using the same technique, it's negative immunohistochemical reaction for nucleocapsid protein. This is actually one of the capillaries or small blood vessels in the heart, and we can see the blood vessels in there. But the point is there's no nucleocapsid protein. So we're not seeing nucleocapsid protein. We are seeing spike protein. Indicates that this can only be caused by the which generates the spike protein, not the natural infection, which would generate the spike protein and the nucleocapsid protein. Well, I think you'll agree that's pretty convincing that this pathology was caused by the and not the natural infection. And you can clearly see the pathology yourself. It's on pictures. You can't say, well, it's not there. It simply is. Now, this is from this paper here, carried out in Germany, post-mortem work carried out in Germany. Now, why aren't autopsies being done in the United States? Why aren't they being done in the UK on these unfortunate patients that die in these circumstances? Why is the Germans the only one that seems to be doing this? I think legitimate questions to be asked and answered there. But moving on to the paper itself, let's look at it. So it's a case report, multifocal, so it occurred in many different parts of the brain. Necrotizing means it kills the tissue, so there was dead tissue. Encephalitis, inflammation of the brain, and it affected the myocardium as well. Published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Vaccines. 76-year-old man, history of Parkinson's disease, died 3 weeks after the third May 2021 was the Oxford vaccine, July 2021 was the Pfizer vaccine, and December 2021 was the Pfizer vaccine. And it was the family that actually requested this due to the ambiguous circumstances of his death. So quite sobering to think, really, if the family hadn't requested this, it would not have been known. Although pathologists in other parts of Germany are conducting post-mortem studies at the moment, again to differentiate between pathology caused by natural infection and pathology caused by COVID vaccination. Now, some quotes from the paper are really quite strongly worded, really. Since no nucleocapsid protein could be detected, the presence of spike protein must be ascribed to rather than to viral infection. Must be ascribed. The findings corroborate previous reports of encephalitis and myocarditis caused by gene-based. And of course, this is completely true. We've looked at previous post-mortem studies from Germany that show this sort of pathology in the heart, and this is also showing us it's in the brain. Another quote here from the paper: a causal connection of these findings to the preceding was established by immunohistochemical demonstration of SARS coronavirus 2 protein. So a causal connection of these findings was established. They're being quite definitive here. Now, for scientists to talk in such absolute terms is unusual, so they only do this when they're really pretty sure. The methodology introduced by this study should be useful for distinguishing between causation by infection in ambiguous cases. Of course, that's not being done pretty well and not being done anywhere I know of. Clinicians should take note of such case reports for the sake of early detection and management of such adverse events among their patients. Again, simply not being done. A thorough post-mortem examination of death in connection with COVID should be considered in ambiguous circumstances, including the histology. Then we would know. Clinical history of this patient. So, as we said, the first vaccine was the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, May 2021. Did experience profound cardiovascular side effects after that, so that could well have been the heart problem there. The brain problem seems to have developed after the second Pfizer vaccine. Family noticed obvious behavioural and psychological changes, didn't want to be touched, anxiety, lethargy, social withdrawal, even didn't want the family around. And of course, brain injury can give rise to very many different clinical manifestations depending on the part of the brain that is involved in a particular case. Also, the Parkinson's disease got noticeably worse. Second week after the third vaccine, suddenly collapsed 2 weeks again, 2 weeks later, died shortly thereafter. Clinical diagnosis with death due to aspiration pneumonia. But as we find from the post-mortem, that aspiration pneumonia was probably caused by fitting. He'd bitten his tongue quite badly. So the brain damage caused the fitting, and it was the fitting and the unconsciousness that caused the aspiration and pneumonia. So I'm afraid that's definitive evidence of spike protein presence in the heart and in the brain. Perhaps regulators would want to watch this video, read this paper, and take that into cognizance as they go forward with their policies. I doubt it, but I would suggest it.
Professor Bhakti found this to be extremely scary. At the end of his presentation, the short version of which we've all seen, the one that he gave in Vienna, but there's a longer version that he gave in Athens. At the end of his presentation, he directly points to the fact that some of the small capillaries, and I guess it starts in the frontal lobe of the brain. Some of the small capillaries don't get enough oxygen anymore, and he says that that is what seems to be causing these perceived personality changes. Now,
well, that would explain the lack of impulse control and the more primitive thinking, because it's the prefrontal cortex that is where higher thought takes place.
She completely changed. She would also refer to her daughter-in-law using bad language, which was not like her at all. Everything was just...
And how is she today? I mean, is she still the same?
She's not as bad. It was like that went on for about 3 months. And then it started tapering off a little bit. But there'll be days where you'll hear stories and then it's like she's okay a little bit and then she goes back to it again. So it's very strange.
It's very strange. But actually, you're not the first person to sit there and talk to us about the Johnson & Johnson.
That's interesting.
Because when you said to me before we went live, it's a personality disorder type thing, I asked you if it was Johnson & Johnson because we've heard it before. Following Johnson & Johnson, depression, crazy mood swings, violent outbursts, yes, erratic behavior.
She would get very angry with people when they said, no, but that didn't happen. We're not getting divorced. Oh, but you told me you were. When people try to explain that the daughter-in-law, that she hadn't abandoned the children, she was so convinced that she had. And she said, I know she has. Why are you lying to me? And she just would get very angry. And it just was such a radical change in her personality. It was so concerning because nobody changes that quickly.
Yes, we have multiple studies now indicating severe behavioral changes in those who receive mRNA shots. And that's because now a study by Ota and colleagues that found the vaccine mRNA and spike protein was being produced in cerebral arteries of stroke patients. We know the mRNA shots based on the second largest COVID vaccine safety study ever conducted with 85 million people in it. They found 200% increased risk of stroke after dose 2 of mRNA shots. So we do know it goes to the brain, causes brain damage, neuronal destruction, and that is reflective onto neuropsychiatric conditions. That was found now in a study by Dr. James Thorpe and colleagues. They actually identified 86 neuropsychiatric safety signals for these COVID shots, including homicidal tendencies, psychosis, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, cognitive impairment, violent behavior. All of this stuff was found to be in far exceedance of what was reported with the flu vaccinations. And so this is so concerning. And this also corroborates multiple other studies. One out of Korea that found increased Alzheimer's risks, increased cognitive impairment risks, and also another study, I believe also out of Korea, found massive increased risks of depression, sleep disorders, and anxiety from these injections. And so we clearly now know, based on the peer-reviewed evidence, it damages the brain, causes brain damage, resulting in neuropsychiatric conditions.